Welcome to Physiology session. Today we are discussing about descending tracts of spinal cord. Descending tracts of the spinal cord are formed by motor nerve fibers arising from brain and descend into the spinal cord. These tracts carry motor impulses from brain to spinal cord. Descending tracts of spinal cord are mainly of two types, pyramidal tracts and extrapyramidal tracts. Pyramidal tracts. Pyramidal tracts were the first tracts to be found in man, and also the pyramidal tracts of spinal cord are the descending tracts concerned with voluntary motor activities of the body. These tracts are otherwise known as corticospinal tracts. There are two corticospinal tracts, the anterior corticospinal tract and the lateral corticospinal tract. While running from the cerebral cortex towards the spinal cord, the fibers of these two tracts give the appearance of a pyramid on the upper part of the anterior surface of the medulla oblongata. Hence, the name pyramidal tracts came from. Now, this is a list of descending tracts of spinal cord. As I said before, pyramidal tracts are two types, anterior corticospinal tract and lateral corticospinal tract. And the next type is extrapyramidal tract. It is of 7 types. The first one is medial longitudinal fasciculus and the second one is anterior vestibulospinal tract. Third one is lateral vestibulospinal tract. The fourth one is reticulospinal tract. And the fifth one is tectospinal tract. The sixth one rubrospinal tract and the last one olivospinal tract. These are the list of pyramidal tracts and extrapyramidal tracts. Today we are mainly focusing on the pyramidal tracts, which means anterior corticospinal tract and lateral corticospinal tract. Okay. Now this is about let us discuss about the origin, course and termination of pyramidal tracts. Fibers of pyramidal tracts arise from the following cells, which means the first one is a giant cells or bed cells or pyramidal cells in the precentral gyrus of the motor cortex. These are situated in the area 4, primary motor area of the frontal lobe. Okay. Other areas of motor cortex are the area number 6, which is a Brodmann's area. It is called as a premotor area and supplementary motor areas. And the third region is other part of the frontal lobe. And the fourth region is somatosensory areas of the parietal lobe. Okay, it is believed that 30% of pyramidal fibers arise from the primary motor cortex area, which is the area number 4, and supplementary motor areas, other 30% from premotor area, which is area number 6, and remaining 40% of fibers arise from the somatosensory areas. Okay, all the above fibers forms the fibers of upper motor neurons of motor pathway. Now, so after taking the origin, the nerve fibers run down towards the diffuse manner. Now let's start the course of the pathway. It will converge, which means the nerve fibers from all the origin areas will form a fan-like structure called corona radiata. This corona radiata contains both the ascending fibers from the thalamus and descending fibers from the cerebral cortex. Now it is passing down towards the brainstem and the corona radiata converges in the form of internal capsule. Okay, it is situated between thalamus and caudate nucleus on the caudate nucleus in the basal ganglia, okay, which is known as the internal capsule, and it will pass down through the internal capsule and then in pons, the fibers descends through the internal capsule, midbrain and pons, which means the course of pathway will reach from the corona radiata and it will reach the internal capsule, then pons and medulla. Okay, in pons, the fibers descend through the internal capsule. While descending through the pons, the fibers are divided into different bundles by nuclei of pons. Okay, at the lower border of the pons, the fibers are grouped once again into compact bundle and then descend down into medulla oblongata. Okay. In medulla, this compact bundle of corticospinal fibers give the appearance of a pyramid. Now, the corticospinal tracts are called as the pyramidal tracts. It is because of the pyramidal structure formation. At the lower border of the medulla, pyramidal tract on each side is divided into two bundles of unequal sizes. Okay, about 80% of fibers from each side cross the opposite side. While crossing the midline, the fibers of both sides forms the pyramidal decussation. Now in the spinal cord, fibers will cross the midline and form the pyramidal decussation, descend through the posterior part of lateral white column of the spinal cord. Okay, this bundle is crossed fibers is known as the crossed pyramidal tracts or lateral corticospinal tract or indirect corticospinal tract. And the remaining 20% of fibers do not cross the opposite side but descend down through the anterior white column of the spinal cord. Okay, this bundle of uncrossed fibers is known as the uncrossed pyramidal tract or the anterior corticospinal tract. This tract is well marked in the cervical region. Now let's come to the termination. Before termination, the majority of fibers of this anterior corticospinal tract cross to the opposite side at different levels of the spinal. Now the pyramidal tract, it is coming to the termination and the pyramidal tract fibers terminate on the both alpha motor neuron and beta motor neuron. Okay, the axons of motor neuron leave the spinal cord as spinal nerve through the anterior nerve root and supply the skeletal muscles. Okay, uh, the uncrossed fibers, all the fibers of pyramidal tract, both the crossed and uncrossed fibers terminate in the motor neuron of the anterior gray horn, which is either directly or through the internuncial neurons. Okay, and then the neuron giving origin to the fibers of pyramidal tract is known as upper motor neurons. At the same time, the anterior motor neurons of spinal cord is known as the lower motor neurons. Now let's explain it with a diagram. Here we can see the pyramidal structure. Here the red bulbar structure is known as the Dept cells, which is from the regions called as somatosensory areas 3, 1 and 2. These are the Brodmann's areas. And then the premotor area number 6 and primary motor area known as area number 4 and supplementary motor areas. From this, the corona radiata is formed. It is the cellular fan-like structure. Okay, it will descend down through the internal capsule, which is a structure in between the thalamus and the it is a structure in between the thalamus and the basal ganglia, and then it descend down through the midbrain, cerebellum and pons, and finally it will reach the medulla, and this will decussate or this will cross the midline so that there forms a pyramidal structure. That is why this pathway is known as pyramidal pathway. And after forming this, after crossing the midline, some fibers which are thick will reach the a spinal cord. Okay, is known as the lateral corticospinal tract. At the same time, the uncrossed fibers is known as the anterior corticospinal tract. This lateral corticospinal tract will then synapse with the alpha motor neuron or beta motor neuron in the white matter of the spinal cord. And from the anterior corticospinal tract, this will then cross the midline, and it will also synapse with the alpha motor neuron and beta motor neuron either directly or through the internnuncial neuron. Okay, this is the pyramidal pathway. Once again, from the best cells, the corona radiata will form. It will descend down through the internal capsule, then midbrain, then cerebellum, pons and medulla, and there forms a crossed fibers and uncrossed fibers. Crossed fibers will form the lateral corticospinal tract, and the uncrossed fiber will form the anterior corticospinal tract, and lateral corticospinal tract will synapse to the alpha motor neuron and beta motor neuron in the white matter of the spinal cord. At the same time, anterior corticospinal tract will after reaching the lateral white column, this will synapse with the alpha motor neuron and beta motor neuron in the opposite side, either directly or through the internnuncial neuron. This is the explanation of pyramidal tract, and this is a diagram. Okay. Now, coming to the type of motor neuron, there are two types of motor neuron, upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. The upper motor neurons will originate in the cerebral cortex and travel down to the brain stem or spinal cord. So, the pyramidal tracts are the upper motor neurons. So, what is lower motor neuron? The lower motor neurons begin in the spinal cord and go on to innervate muscles and glands throughout the body. Okay, the first portion of the nerve fiber is known as upper motor neuron, and from this spinal cord, then these fibers will reach the muscles and glands. So that portion is known as the lower motor neuron. Okay, let me explain this with the diagram. This is the brain, and we can see the spinal cord is descending down from the brain structure, and from this here we can see this innervation will and terminate in the muscle. So the upper motor neuron is this green structure. From the higher centers, it will descend down through the spinal cord. Okay, and then it will ends in the spinal cord. That is the upper motor neuron. And next, it will synapse and go to the muscle, and it will terminate there, and the effect will happen. Okay, so these nerve fibers are known as the lower motor neuron. Okay, two type of motor neuron, upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. Okay, this is again a diagram. Now, functions and lesions. Functions, the pyramidal tracts are concerned with voluntary movements of the body, and these two tracts are responsible for fine and skilled movements. Okay, the fibers of pyramidal tracts transmit motor fibers from motor area of cerebral cortex to the anterior motor neurons of the spinal cord. Okay, now coming to the lesion. The effect of lesion is the lesion the neurons of motor cortex and fibers of pyramidal tract is known as the upper motor neuron lesion. So we discussed about the upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. So any kind of lesion or any kind of disturbances happening in the for example tumors or any kind of disturbances that happen in the upper motor neuron is the upper motor neuron lesion. At the same time, if it affects the lower motor neuron, it is known as a lower motor neuron lesion. Okay, in human beings, pure pyramidal tract lesion do not occur. Lesion of pyramidal tract occur the most commonly in stroke, which is a cardiovascular accident due to hemorrhage and thrombosis. Okay. So during such lesions, many extrapyramidal fibers are also damaged along with the pyramidal fibers. Now let's discuss about the symptoms. The voluntary movements. Voluntary movements of the body are very much affected. And initially there will be loss of voluntary movements in the extremities. Later it involves the other part of the body like hip and shoulder. And it will also affect the muscular tone. Muscular tone is increased leading to spasticity. The muscles are also paralyzed. This type of paralysis of muscle is known as spastic paralysis. The main reason of spasticity is due to the failure of inhibitory impulses from upper motor neuron, particularly the neuron of extrapyramidal system. Okay, and coming to the reflex, all the superficial reflexes are lost and deep reflexes are exaggerated. For example, abnormal planar reflex is known as a Babinski sign, which is present. Okay, and that's all about the symptoms. Coming to applied physiology, one of the most important diseases are the UMN paralysis. The paralysis that result from lesion of descending fibers between their origin from cortical motor areas and their termination on anterior horn cells in the spinal cord is known as the upper motor neuron paralysis. Okay, clinically the pyramidal or corticospinal tract lesion is referred to as upper motor neuron paralysis. Features of UMN paralysis are the increased muscle tone or spasticity. The next feature is no muscular atrophy. A mild atrophy may occur in long run due to disuse of muscle is called disuse atrophy. And the next is muscles are usually affected in groups. Individual muscles are never affected. And the tendon reflexes are also exaggerated. The next is superficial reflexes are lost. The extensor planar response or Babinski sign is positive and no muscular twitches, no denervation potential in EMG, and normal nerve conduction studies. Now, these are the effects of upper motor neuron lesion and lower motor neuron lesion. It is the first one is a clinical observation and next is a clinical confirmation. Here the effects and what will happen if the upper motor neuron lesion and lower motor neuron lesion will happen. In case of muscle tone, when the upper motor neuron lesion happen, it is a hypertonia. If the in case of lower motor neuron, it is a hypotonia. Okay, and paralysis is spastic type of paralysis, which means it will be more rigid. Okay, and flaccid type of paralysis is more not rigid. It is a kind of flowy in type, and the wastage of muscle occurs in upper motor neuron lesion, and the wastage of muscle occurs in lower motor neuron lesion also. And the superficial reflexes are lost in upper motor neuron lesion and lower motor neuron lesion. In the planar reflex, we are all familiar with the Babinski sign. Here it is positive in upper motor neuron lesion. At the same time, it is absent in the lower motor neuron lesion. Babinski sign is also known as the abnormal planar reflex. And in case of deep reflexes, the upper motor neuron lesion, in case of upper motor neuron lesion, it is exaggerated, but in element lesion, it is lost. Clonus formation is present in the upper motor neuron lesion and absent in element lesion. Okay, now coming to clinical confirmation, the electrical activity is normal in the UMN lesion. At the same time, it is absent in the element lesion. Okay, and the muscles are affected in the upper motor neuron because the corona radiata are forming as a bundle of muscles. There are so many nerve fibers are involved in the upper motor neurons. So if it will get affected, a group of muscles will get affected. Um, will get affected. At the same time, in case of lower motor neuron lesion, it is individual nerve fibers, a peripheral motor neuron. So it is the individual nerve fiber is terminating at the different different muscles. So the individual muscles are affected in case of lower motor neuron lesion. Okay, Now the final clinical confirmation is fascicular twitch in EMG, which is absent in the UMN lesion. At the same time, in the LMN lesion, it is present. So that is all about the UMN lesion and LMN lesion. That's all about the pyramidal tracts and descending pathways. So let's wind up the session. Thank you.